Thank you so much. Your Eminence, distinguished clergy, friends, I'm thrilled to be with you. I hate having to jump in so quick in the lunch to talk, but I have a client down the street, pretty demanding, and so I've got to go down there in a little bit. But I did want to spend a few moments talking to you. And first of all, I appreciate very much the kind introduction, and it's always an honor for me to be with you because I consider you family. I mean, we talked about that last night. I mean, Andy and I have known each other for 40 years. Our families actually, Andy's wife Georgia and my wife Pam's family go back to the 1970s. So, a long time. But I want to talk about, in a few minutes, my concern. Andy mentioned sacred spaces. I'm a firm believer in the significance of space, holy spaces, sacred spaces. Because it's not just the building and the dirt, and it's not just the institution. It's the symbolism of what it represents. So when I first got involved in your church, in the Orthodox Church, in assisting, Andy brought up the mission to Israel. So I could tell you how to negotiate a peace deal in the Middle East. A lot of prayer. Because let me tell you something. What Andy gave you the shortened version of that situation with Theophilus. But the truth is, as soon as we got the Israelis to agree, the Jordanians were going to back out. So when you're dealing with the Middle East, you can't just think three-dimensionally. You have to think nine-dimensionally. You have to think around what's coming next. And it's not that different than life in Washington. And Andy and Mike Manatos could attest to that. I mean, you've got to think around the problem. You've got to think around the issue. But as it relates to the Ecumenical Patriarchate and being in Constantinople, I remember we had a conversation, I think we were in Berlin, and someone said, well, wouldn't it just be easier to move the Patriarchate to New York City or to Washington or to Paris or someplace else? And the truth is, it might be easier to do that, but that's not the right thing. Because what you do not want to do when you give up the space, which is a witness and a testimony in and of itself, you're giving up a lot. You're giving up part of the core of your faith. You're giving up part of the core. And I would say it for those that are not Orthodox as well. I mean, the symbolism of, just think about this for a moment, of the Ecumenical Patriarchate, the moving out of Constantinople. Think about this. What does that represent for the rest of Christendom? Surrender. And we're not called to surrender. We have the message of hope. And that message of hope goes forward even in places where it's not always well received. And Turkey has been a particular burden for us. I know for the church as well, but for us institutionally at the ACLJ. And let me make it really personal, because the conference title is about persecution. And my son, who I'm very proud of, did a great job yesterday of laying out that distinction between discrimination and persecution. But let me give you an example of persecution to an American. 23 years, Andrew Brunson ministered in Izmir, Turkey. 23 years. He got his theology degree from Wheaton, his PhD from St. Andrews. He never had an incident in 23 years of ministering the gospel in Turkey. He carried on his ministry without a problem. Then there was this coup last summer, the so-called coup. And I will say so-called coup. And Andrew Brunson gets picked up in that coup and in jail now for 458 days, yet to have a charge filed against him. That's persecution. He is in a prison in Turkey because he's a Christian. He did not know Fethullah Gulen. He does not cavort with the enemy, which is what these regimes will allege. He had a small church of about 50 people in Izmir that worshiped on a Sunday. And he's in jail now for going on 500 days. The United States has been very aggressive in the last 8 months, demanding his release. But the Turks have said this: you have our preacher, Fethullah Gulen, we have yours. You give us ours, we will give you yours. Now, this pastor is not by denomination Orthodox. He's a Protestant, Presbyterian. It's irrelevant. He's a Christian brother who's being persecuted for one reason only. So I'm going to tell you, as his lawyer, that his case is as important as the case I handle for the President of the United States. And your presence in Turkey is hope for him and his family. That in that scenario that he finds himself in that horrible situation he finds himself in, that he knows there is a Christian presence in a land that is often hostile to faith. But we also have a message of hope. You know, as Andy said, I'm the grandson of a Russian immigrant. My grandfather came to the United States in 1914. He was, somebody said he had a fruit store in Brooklyn. He didn't have a fruit store in Brooklyn. He had a fruit stand in Brooklyn. He went to 5th grade. And that was the end of his formal education, although he spoke 5 languages. And as Andy said, his grandson, me, I get to argue at the Supreme Court of the United States. Or represent a president. Or represent Andrew Brunson. And each one takes on its own responsibility. But what I want to encourage you, and why I am so thrilled, Dr. Limbarakis, that you continue with your team to do these events, to highlight this issue. It is so important with the church of historic roots that the Orthodox faith has to take a stand not only for those within your denomination, but for the wider body, is really significant and really important. You know, there's a Judge Bozanellis in there, so I got to be really careful, because there's this parable I really like in the New Testament. It's the parable of Jesus and the unjust judge. Present company excluded. But you know, in this parable, a woman wants justice so badly that she goes to the door of a judge's house and knocks on the door to demand justice. And the judge didn't fear God and didn't fear man, and this woman kept knocking. So she's knocking, and the judge doesn't fear God and doesn't fear man, and this woman keeps knocking. Doesn't fear God, doesn't fear man, but this woman was driving him crazy. He opened the door. And what did Jesus say? How much more will our Father do for us if we continue to petition him? Your presence, your clergy, your determination to continue this fight at this moment, at this very time, is significant. It is a significant way beyond anything we can really grasp ourselves. It's the significance of speaking up for those who cannot defend themselves. You know, I don't know what will happen tomorrow in the Middle East or tonight, but I do know this. There are believers that will be persecuted. There's a pastor in jail. There's a headquarters, the head of the church for the great Greek Orthodox faith, that barely can get out of the Phanar. You can pass all the legislation in the world. You can have the strongest armies in the world. But to those people that are being persecuted by ISIS, Al-Qaeda, governments. For those people, legislation right now isn't going to mean a lot. They need hope. They are a testimony too. I think what was said yesterday is so correct. They're witnesses. They're martyrs, but they're witnesses. We live, those of us that are from the United States of America, we live in the greatest country in the world. And I don't hesitate in saying it for a moment. We live in America. We live in the United States. We're Americans. We believe in freedom and liberty, which includes, of course, religious freedom. But we also know this. We are part of the world. We are in a world global community. And while we can't foist our values on every other culture, that doesn't always work out so well, we can do this. Basic fundamental human dignity, human rights, which includes the right to worship, is a universal right that we should do everything in our power to protect. So I am here actually to say thank you. Thank you for taking the stand that you're continuing to take. Thank you for continuing to speak out on this issue. Thank you for being like that woman who wanted justice so badly, she went to the judge's house and knocked and got justice. Our prayer, our hope, our desire is for justice for those that are persecuted for their faith. And by the way, let me close with this. We have to win this. We have no option. We have to win. But let us be like that woman, doing everything we can in our power, but recognizing that there's a power far greater than us that allows us to raise our voice, whether it's in the pulpit, whether it's in commerce, whether it's down the block at the Supreme Court, or down this block at the White House. Let us be like that woman, petitioning God for justice for those that can't speak for themselves. Thank you so much again for having me. Enjoy the lunch. Thank you so much.